one of the, I believe, top 10 biotechnologists in the world. He may say one of the most of 100, maybe, I don't know. We don't argue. I know him for a while, before German unification, and he was born during the World War II. This is a long time ago, in the eastern part of Germany, like me. This is not the only connection we have, of course. And he had his Master of Science and was educated, first of all, at the University of Hanover, Germany. Finally, in 1979, full professor of biotechnology at the University of Bonn until 2008. This is 19 years, right? Or 20 years almost. Long time, okay. And now retired, a visiting professor. Interesting to Japan, China, Singapore, South Korea, Fukuoka in Japan, also in Innsbruck teaching, and in Busan in South Korea. From his papers, there are 330 publications, 100 patents, and what impressed me most was that he had 130 PhD students, and out of these students, 14 professors originating in his group. This is almost 10% of your PhD students are being professor. Imagine if we do this here, it would be great. I would be very happy. He got a lot of awards. I just want to mention the Philip Morris Award for development of a biogas, a high performance process for treatment of polluted water, and the Carl Friedrich Gauss Award. And maybe you know my shop, Einstein Cafe. There is now, to honor him, not really, but we have Gauss as a picture there, as a cartoon, because Gauss was our most famous mathematician, and he got this Carl Friedrich Gauss Award in Braunschweig. Wöhler Award. Wöhler was, you remember, organic chemist, the first, and he's a member of many scientific societies. And now I have fortunately convinced him to come over to see our place. Again, he was here already, I think, several years ago. 10 years ago. And hope you find it has improved. This was not here, IAS. I'm very grateful to IAS to sponsor it and to invite you all. And I also want to check any of my students here. Can you raise your hand? Who's my student? 1, 2, 3, 4. Thanks for coming. And we will have one question in the final examination from this lecture. So listen and give you can also ask him a question and you get a bonus point. You know my system. And so this is a long speech now. I want to make it short. And please welcome Professor Christian Wandrey.
So this was a long introduction. Thank you very much. But this time is not taken away from my time of speaking. No. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much for coming at this rainy day. As you heard, 10 years ago I was here. By this time I was still an active professor, and Professor Renneberg will join me to become an emeritus soon. Yeah? So it was 40 years ago when I became a professor. That is why the introduction was so long. Yeah? So this will not be a typical speech on science, because I am 8 years out of my job as professor. So science is outdated here in my personal computer. But there's something still very valuable, and that is what you learned over such a long time. And what I learned over such a long time was from the lab to production, technology transfer in biotechnology. So I will tell you about the experience. So what is the way, after you had a good idea in the lab, to bring it finally into production? And there is a famous German writer, and he said 200 years ago, knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. In other words, technology transfer. So I was in China several times ago. So in 1995 on the International Congress on Glass in Beijing, in 1997 again at the Enzyme Engineering Conference, a special photograph was taken. And in 2006, I was at Tsinghua University. I remember the young fathers with their little boys on their shoulders. They were always photographed in front of the entrance gate. Then next in Xi'an, where Professor Renneberg will go next week, yes, in 2006, and also in 2006 at the East China University, and also in 2006 in Nanning. Why Nanning? Because there is the production site of the enzyme membrane reactor, and there is you see the Chinese word degussa here, and in 2007 I was just here, and in 2015 at Ningbo University, I will tell you more about this occasion because here's a company, Enzyme Master, in Ningbo, and I'll tell you more later. And finally, in 2017.
Same weather.
Same weather, same site. So, introduction. So this is the outline, and when you see red color, you know how far I am. Now I'm at introduction. So biotechnology is the integrated application of microbiology, biochemistry, and chemical engineering. And in the definition, there's already application. So biotechnology is not basic science. Biotechnology is combining different areas of basic science for application. So, and you see the people from the Office of Technology Assessment in the US, they know application. Out of DNA, they produce dollars. So that is the application-oriented. It's interdisciplinary. Interesting enough, the transfer in this field that can also be done in small and medium scale, and it's more controlled by know-how than by raw material cost. I have the privilege to be the chairman of the board of a little German company, a shareholders company, and the recent results was 4% raw material cost. 4% out of the total cost. You can reckon what was the biggest part, not the gain, the personal cost. So that was already introduction. Now, elements of technology transfer. So what are the key success factors of technology transfer? And yeah, first you have to have an idea. That means that you need money in your institute to produce knowledge that how to make a substance, in this case, N-acetyl-neuraminic acid. And finally, it would be nice if you can produce out of this knowledge intellectual property a patent. But that's called invention, but invention is not enough. Remember the saying from Goethe, you must also do. So you need also a second part of this cycle, what's called innovation. You have to make out of a patent a product, and finally you have to sell the product and make money. And that's nice if you can now recycle this money to generate more knowledge. So products which out of my former institute are pictured here, and it's better to have a bottle with the product than a spectrum of the product only. It was always my philosophy, you have to put a bottle on the bottle of the table, if the proof is the proof of the pudding in the eating. And more, yes, you need more. You need to transfer this information. And one's own ideas, development, and so on are transferred more easily than by transfer commissioners as negotiators. So between scientists and industry, these commissioners have only shelf warmers to offer. So the bottles warm the shelf. So if you cannot convince yourself, your customer, it's difficult. And you need even more. What more? What more elements of technology transfer? You need companies as licensees and cooperation partners. And I have in red encircled so more known companies you will have heard of, maybe of Novartis or the company Dutch Staatsminen, not Deutsche Sammlung Mikroorganismen. That's a German ATCC. That's a very interesting company in the Netherlands. And we had a lot of licensed and cooperation partners. This is with established companies, but these established companies sometimes are very highbrow. So 25 years ago, they told me, Professor Wandrey, come again if you can do your catalysis in a proper organic solvent. So biocatalysis is catalysis in diluted aqueous solution. We can't use it. Anyway, so in such a case, it's good to have start-up companies. So you have to form your start-up companies if the established companies don't listen to you. And here are a number of start-up companies originating from my hometown, Jülich. And here, one of these companies is now in Ningbo, China. And in essence, it's a daughter company from the company Jülich Chiral Solutions. And the former boss of this company is now in the board of this Chinese company. And I will tell you a little bit on this company and on this company and so on. So, elements of technology transfer. So, there are different areas in biotechnology. There is the hardware-software area. So here you have something which I call your personal biotechnicum. I will comment on this later. And then if you want it so big, you make an ultimate downscaling. That's like in microelectronics. And in microelectronics, you have the electric circuits. And then now we have tiny flow lines. And I will show you later, it's a downscaling for microfluidics. And then we have different areas of biotechnology. You can also say different colors. There is the white or industrial biotechnology. I give you the example L-Lysine. There is something between the red medical biotechnology and the white industrial. We say pink, so something in between. And that is the example L-methionine. Then from the red field, the biofield, I have N-acetyl-neuraminic acid. That's the example I had already mentioned in the technology transfer cycle. And from the gray or environment biotechnology, I have an example now, 300 cubic meter each the reactor, that are reactors for biogas production from wastewater. So that is the scene. And now I come to the first chapter of these colors, that is hardware, software. So here, the idea was there are shake flasks, they're cheap, and you can have a lot of experiments, but the experiments are stupid. You only see in the end what happens. And then there's an alternative, a fermenter. There you have a high information gain, but the fermenter is expensive. So why don't you try to make a hybrid, combine the best of two worlds? So you would like to make a lot of experiments in a small scale with a high information gain. And how do you do it? So if you look to Pasteur, so he was a chemist and he was used to shake a test tube. So he also more or less was the inventor of shake flasks for mixing and for oxygen transfer. But if you think a little bit more on mass transfer, here you want mass transfer from microorganisms. So if you want mass transfer for fish, would you shake your fish tank? What is the higher need for oxygen? 1 gram of fish or 1 gram of aerobe microorganism? certainly the 1 gram of anaerobic microorganisms need more oxygen. So what you use is a glass frit, like in a fish tank. So that is the solution to provide sufficient oxygen. So you need the evolution of the shake flask. So actually, this is an instrument for very bad oxygen transfer. You select for low producers. So if you go to an instrument, what a chemist calls eine Waschflasche, a wash flask, or what a biotechnologist calls a bubble column, then you have a better chance. So, and if you substitute the glass by a bottom with laser drill tiny holes, then you can even do better. So that is the evolution of the shake flask. Then you put this evolution now in a multiple way, many bubble columns, and you need not to be shaked longer. So, and that is like a first-class restaurant. You can do a multiple fat batch, so each table gets the soup first and the main course later, meaning, for instance, the carbon source, the nitrogen source. And so each table has its own waiter. And here is the own digital waiter presenting the bill. And so you combine these mini bubble columns with a multiplex digital control. And these were the constituents of one company. The Dust-Gib company. So the problem you had in the past was if you will do industrial relevant development, you need a biotechnicum with a lot of hardware and software. So we were in the very nice situation that we had such a pilot plant, but not many people have the money. So what do you want? You don't want such a pilot plant, you want your personal pilot plant, meaning you want your personal biotechnicum. That's why you have to scale it down. And this PhD student, she was very clever. She was the person to ask, why do you shake the shake flask? Would you shake your fish tank? And you see, we have no oxygen limitation, we have bubble stirring, and we have multiple fat batch, high-class restaurant. So, in summary, the invention, I highlighted in red, is mostly overcome oxygen limitation, and the innovation, how to bring it in real life, was to make out a very expensive technicum your personal biotechnic. You will find these things again in the different chapters. I always summarize invention and innovation, and so that you don't have to read everything, look only on the red. So now, can't you do it smaller? Yes, you can do it smaller. You can go to such a chip, which now not represent a microelectronic chip, it represents a microfluidic chip. And in such a chip, up to 1,000 channels are there in parallel. So you can do 1,000 experiments on a microchip. And that is the person, Professor Kohlheier, who was kind enough to give me his results so that I can bring some really new things. And the idea is you go from cubic meter scale to about this scale, and now you go to the picoliter scale. And what you can see here, this is at 0 dimension, one cell, at 1 dimension, at a layer, 2-dimensional, or even in a 3-dimensional field. And here is the flow. Remember, 1,000 channels on one chip. And these are the reactors. This is the chamber of a chemostat with partial biomass retention. And here you see it in reality. This is a match. And now it moves. Now I have a little movie. and you have up to thousands of these channels, and the dark dots are the nutrients flowing along, and the big things are the cells. The cells enter reactors, and the nutrients come to the cells, and since the nutrients are coming, the cells divide, and these cells become yellow. Why, you will see later. There's a yellow fluorescent protein, and then you can have different chambers, one-dimensional, two-dimensional, three-dimensional, and you can provide the nutrients along this so quick that you have initial rate conditions. So not once more, once again. So now let us look on the reactors. So the most interesting one is this. I call this a single cell garage. So the nutrients fly from left to right, and here is a cell. So the nutrients from left to right, and if the cell wants to divide, the only chance is that the daughter car goes this way and is washed away. So the entire reactor is always governed by the one original cell. And if you have a high producer, this is very nice. So here you see now the potential of this initial rate kinetics. So this population of Corynebacterium glutamicum, we always use this because this is a strain important for amino acid production. And if you measure the growth rate, you find something much faster than in literature. In comparison to literature, it's about 1 times faster. Why? If you look to the literature, you see the other figures. Interestingly enough, the bigger the scale, the smaller the mu max. The answer is quite clear. It's mass transfer, and it's the influence of products. These strains have such a rapid flow of nutrients that the strain doesn't see any product. It only sees substrate. I say it in order to reach your mind. I say it more ridiculously. I say they don't sit in their excrements. And that is why the mu max is much bigger. So you see how important downscaling might be. So here is something where we have growth in the presence of acetic acid, and afterwards we have production in the presence of glucose. We have separated growth and production, and during growth the cells become yellow again. I keep a little bit the attention why they become yellow. And you see there is a heterogeneous population. Some populations become very yellow but late, so there is a great population heterogeneity. And these reactors are excellent to investigate population heterogeneity. Here you see once again the cell, and you have seen the different things in the different chambers. Here and here you can have different things, but you want, of course, the best producer. And if you analyze, there are some which are high producers and others which are not so good producers. And now, with these yellow fluorescent cells, you can find cells which have a high fluorescence in the beginning. You can cells which develop fluorescence over the cultivation period. And the average value doesn't tell you anything. Of course, you want the high producer, and now you can pick one cell, the high producer, and you can now make an entire population out of the high producer. If you have a genetically stable cell, it will remain a high producer. If not, you have to investigate what is the reason for the genetic instability. So to summarize this, it is picoliter microfluidics. We can make single-cell continuous cultures, and we can make high producers out of it with a single-cell basis. So that is the summary of the ultimate downscaling. So that is enough for hardware. now let's come to white biotechnology, respectively industrial biotechnology. My example here is L-Lysine, an amino acid. Why L-Lysine? You see, if a baby gets breast milk, little waste is coming out because it's optimal nutrition. And if you give some lysine to animal feed, little waste is coming out because it's better metabolic use. It's better for the cow, it's better for the environment, it's better for the farmer. So that is the motivation why we do feed supplementation. By the way, it's a 2 million ton business, 2 million ton business. So what is the background? The background is a wild type cell doesn't produce lysine. So you have to convince by genetic methods the cell to produce lysine. So what you have to do is you have to clone a metabolic motorway of the lysine pathway. And you have to deregulate the TCA cycle by reducing the activity of the citrate synthase. But in theory, if you bring this down to 0, then you can make out of 1 glucose 0.8 molecules of lysine. But that is too much to ask. That is like you ask a horse to draw the wagon and don't eat. So you need some energy in the TCA cycle. So the target is reduce the activity of the TCA cycle, but not to 0, then the horse will die. And so how can we measure all this? We can measure this by so-called isotopomers that are 13 3-labeled glucose molecules, and there are 64 different glucoses with respect to the labeling of glucose. 64, 2 to the times 6, to the power 6. So that means we test our organism with 64 different glucoses, and so we have a system of 135 differential equations. Why 135 differential equations? We have about we have about 1,000 metabolites, and if you take always the 64 enantiomer isotopomers, you can produce all this differential equation, and that is experimental basis to calculate the fluxes. The fluxes are always referred to the glucose uptake. You see here, from 1 we get 0.8, in reality 0.42. There is some room for improvement to come from here to here. I will show you in a moment. So this is state of the art, 500 cubic meter fermenter. L-lysine goes for feed supplementation. But first to summarize, we analyze the pathways, we reduce the TCA cycle, we do gross decoupling. And the innovation, interestingly, one important part of innovation was downstream processing. Feed supplementation stuff is comparatively cheap. Downstream processing is comparatively expensive. The cheapest downstream processing is if you don't do downstream processing. You just spray dry your fermentation broth and tell the farmers you will get additional microbial protein for free. And so that was the business idea which really functions. So, and the GUST nowadays, the Wandrey company has now about 500,000 tons per year, what is about 25% of the world market. So, now, can we do better? Answer is, of course, yes, we can do better. Rapid development of better production strains. And these 2 PhDs, they brought up this, and the supervisor had a very brilliant idea, but they did the innovation. So what was the idea? The idea was, if a microorganism has in its cytosol 1 metabolite in a too high concentration, you need digestion of microorganisms. Do you know how microorganisms have their digestion, they form special secretion carriers. So the idea is if a metabolite docks here and is so-called translation regulator, then the production of a secretion carrier is initiated so that the organism gets rid of the metabolite which is in too high concentration. And the brilliant idea was now we substitute the information for the secretion carrier by the information make yellow fluorescent protein. And if we now have one metabolite in very high concentration, then the cell will become yellow. So we have a reporter gene. And now the cell gets not rid of this metabolite, but we see the cell having a high metabolite concentration. What is this good for? If we want to produce a lot of lysine, we make a lot of mutants, and then we have these yellow cells. And what is good on the yellow cells? They can be traced by FACS, by fluorescence activated cell sorter. I show you in a moment. So the idea is here, the metabolite initiates the production of the yellow fluorescence color, and now we say cells who have this intense yellow color are high producers. So we can now initiate a mutation program. We can do in a classical way, just with poison, X-ray, but we can also do in modern ways, technical evolution. Then we get these yellow cells. We select the producers. After this, we take the best cells. We make a microscale cultivation, and then we do the total sequencing. And from the total sequencing, we see the changes. And then we can do saturation, mutagenesis at hot spots. So an entire program. So first, the yellow cells have to be selected in a fluorescence activated cell sorter. And the fine thing is you can do 20 million cells in 30 minutes. 20 million cells. And I show you now a little film, real time. So that are the yellow cells. Out of 20 million. So, and you can afford to kill 99.99 cells if you have a few. I stop here, and here we have select the best. So 40 mutants were analyzed in detail, and we found some very interesting, a certain gene, the MUR-E gene, I show you in the moment, was obviously changed by our mutation program, which we had not found before. And where is the MUR-E gene? The MUR-E gene is in the lysine pathway, and then we know it is in our already known production strain 1933, and then we do saturation mutagenesis and become even better. So this is a very powerful program, and the two gentlemen have already a customer in China for this. So in the past 2 years for this improvement, and now in 4 weeks. So small is beautiful, smaller is even more beautiful. That is the message. So you see, the invention was the substitution of a secretion carrier by a reporter protein, and the innovation was using this technique for ultra-high throughput screening. So this concludes this story, and now I come to the intermediate between industrial biotechnology and the red biotechnology, an infusion solution, L-methionine. I have chosen this example because it has something to do with China. So I started this long ago. The basic idea is if you have a racemate of N-acetyl DL amino acid, it's like a left and right hand molecule, And if you want only to have the 4 fingers of the left hand, you have selectively to split off the left thumb. And then you have a difference in the physical properties of the molecules that's called racemic resolution or biocatalyzed racemic resolution. You see here the thumb is cleaved off. This is our target product, and this is the remaining other molecule, and so we have to separate them physically, and then we can go with pure L-amino acids in our infusion solution. By the way, if you are not so familiar with this, try to do the following. Take the 3 fingers of the left and the right hand, put the 2 thumbs together, and now go to the table and put the other 2 always together. It doesn't function. That's a 3-point chiral attachment program of nature. So we made a reactor, and it's catalyzed by an enzyme. The enzyme is normally retained by the membrane of a cell. Why don't we retain the enzyme by an ultrafiltration membrane? Then we put in the substrate, the catalyst retained, we can get a product. So it's very similar to making coffee. Yeah? Here is the educt, here's the product, and here's something retained by the filter. But there's a great difference. This is not reducible, but our catalyst is reusable. So you can do continuous homogeneous catalysis. And so this represents the reactor. So here you have a flat membrane, and if you roll this like this, you have a hollow fiber. And this hollow fiber membrane is like porous macaronis. The pores are so that the catalyst in yellow is retained, but the reaction partners come through the membrane. And in the next picture, you see the physical representation. This is a membrane reactor. The production site is in Nanning, China, and the company Evonik has up to 75% of the world market of L-methionine. And if you look on this picture, the only gentleman which doesn't look very German is this one. That's the boss of the factory. So in summary, what was the invention? Continuous homogeneous catalysis. And what was the innovation? Something we have never thought of. We got it for free. If you retain your enzyme by an ultrafiltration membrane, you get an ultra-filtered product solution. Your ultra-filtered product solution goes to infusion solutions. And the infusion solutions go directly in your bloodstream. And you don't want pyrogens, fever-creating compounds. But if you have an ultra-filtered product solution, the pyrogen removal is part of the process. That's something we have never thought of, but that was part of the winning of the game. Next example. I look on my wife. You know why? Because she says, you did do this for 30 years, and you are much too quick. They cannot understand this a lot. That's always why I look whether she is concerned or whether she's not so concerned. I better look on the oil. Yeah. So after I realize that I come through with my time, I can slow down a bit. Next, wet biotechnology. Here is a cell that's also in your nose. And that is the glycosylation of your cell in your nose. And the last part of this glycosylation chain is neuraminic acid. And if a virus gets into your nose and causing influenza, how does the virus function? The virus splits off the neuraminic acid, because this is difficult for the virus, because neuraminic acid has a charge. And that is why the virus has an enzyme, the neuraminidase, and this is the enzyme, and so here it can split this off and then finally attack your nose. So the idea of curing this is you produce an inhibitor so that this cannot happen. So what could the inhibitor be so that the inhibitor fits in the active site of an enzyme? Maybe a derivative of neuraminic acid. So that is, if you want to make an enzyme inhibitor, it makes sense to produce the substrate. And then you make a derivative of the substrate. So the substrate is neuraminic acid. So neuraminic acid has here a charge. And actually in nature, there is an enzyme, an aldolase, neuraminidase, which catalyzes the reaction from right to left. But in industry, you can use this reaction using high concentrations of this compound and this compound and force it from left to right. For the people which are good in thermodynamics, if the number of molecules goes down from left to right, then you have to increase the concentration. So, okay, the problem is that this is very expensive, but this is cheap. Why this is cheap? Because this is nothing else but hydrolyzed chitin. That is N-acetyl-glucosamine. There's an epimerase, but the equilibrium of the reaction from here to here is only at 18%. And of course, this is a one-to-one reaction. This equilibrium doesn't depend on the concentration level. So you have bad chances. With 18% conversion, you cannot reach very high concentrations here. But you have another chance. You have pyruvate. So you need to make a high pyruvate concentration. And now, if you use higher and higher pyruvic acid concentrations, you can shift the equilibrium from 60 to 80 to more than 80% equilibrium by driving the reaction from left to right. So the message is use the highest possible pyruvic acid concentration. And these lines represent the forward reaction and the backward reaction. And where these reaction rates for the forward reaction and the backward reaction become equal, there you have equilibrium. That's classical kinetics and thermodynamics. So the method system synthesis instead of degradation, we find out by analytical thermodynamics and kinetics, use the highest possible concentration of pyruvate. So, and finally, it was produced, and it was produced in ton scale to make the drug Relenza, or also called zanamivir, in order to prevent you from influenza. So you cannot see, at least I couldn't see, how you come from here to here. So the molecule looks very different. But if you twist the molecule a bit, then you can see. So you see a 6-membered ring, and here you see a 6-membered ring, and here you see a double bond. And if you split off this OH and the hydrogen here, then you form this double bond. So that is a derivative. And that is why neuraminic acid is so important. So to summarize again, the invention was to change from a degrading reaction to a synthesis reaction. And so the innovation was to look for an enzyme catalyst isomerization and finally also to bring it in practical being. So we had a lot of discussion on intellectual properties with Smith-Kline. So, another example from red biotechnology is cofactor regeneration. So if you want to make a non-natural amino acid, this is a non-natural amino acid with a trivial name tertiary leucine, there is no genetic code for non-natural amino acid. How do you produce non-natural amino acid? You can do so by doing chiral amination of a prochiral compound, and then you end up with an amino acid. That is reductive amination. For reductive amination, you need reduced cofactors, and cofactors are expensive. How do you regenerate these cofactors? You can do by a very interesting hydrogen source by formate. And the co-product is carbon dioxide. And these total ideas happened in a dining car of the German railway. That is why the boss of the German railway asked me to have a copy of this PowerPoint, because he said, I didn't know that we are so innovative. But it wasn't wrong, it was invention. Anyway, you see the motivation to produce this enzyme. So how can we produce this enzyme? So Candida boidinii yeast can produce formic acid. So this yeast can live on methanol. The yeast was rather like glucose. But if we give the yeast only methanol, the yeast does the following. The yeast oxidizes methanol, this pathway, under its carbon dioxide. That is simply energy production. And on the other way, the yeast uses part of this carbon to do this ribulose monophosphate cycle to finally end up in 6-phosphate, or this is classical metabolites of glycolysis. So this is building the cell material, and this is energy. So in here, here is formate dehydrogenase. So the cell is well advised to have enough of formate dehydrogenase, otherwise the cell would be drowned in an acid. So there is a very good selective stress to make this enzyme. So, and you see we made a lot, and here we made formate dehydrogenase from this Candida boidinii, and this is now used to produce this non-natural amino acid. So the entire motivation produce a lot of this cofactor regeneration enzyme to make non-natural amino acids. Why non-natural amino acids? They are part of peptide drugs. And these peptide drugs are split in your bloodstream by serum proteases. And if you betray a little bit your peptide drugs in your bloodstream, it takes more time until your peptide drug is split. So the time your drug is valid is prolonged. But it should not be prolonged to infinity. It must be the right way, of course. So here is the production of enzyme, you see, with an entire barrel of methanol. So why did we do it in such a great scale? Because in those days the enzyme was so expensive, nobody would say that's used in production. That is why we had to convince people you can produce it. And we could produce in a thermostat 1 million units per day. That was worth $1 million per day. But only in the catalog. The catalog value was $1. After this, the value dropped to 4 cents per unit. But making a unit per day still is a good result. So, summary. My colleague, Professor Sam, identified the enzyme. My lady colleague, Professor Kula, found out that this enzyme is good for cofactor regeneration. And my co-workers and I, we developed the process. And in innovation, we even could do a continuous process. Why? There are very few fermentative processes which can be done in continuous manner. Many people have tried to make continuous beer brewing, not really successful. But here, there is a selective stress to making more formate dehydrogenase, otherwise the cell will die. So now, it was used to make this type of reaction. And now we need to enlarge the enzyme NAD. NAD has a molecular weight of 663. Enzymes typically have 50, 100,000 molecular weight, or Dalton. So these cofactors would leak through the membrane. What do? They take this is polyethylene glycol, a water-soluble polymer, and then you put in the alpha and in the omega position an NAD molecule, and then you have an enlarged molecule. And this molecule is now big enough to be retained by a membrane. Here you see, these molecules are now big enough to retain by the membrane. It must be water-soluble because these molecules must switch between the production enzyme and the regeneration enzyme backwards and forwards. The cell does it much more clever because the cell has such an intelligent membrane, coenzyme doesn't leak out of the cell. But our membrane is stupid, and that is why we have to employ some chemistry. So here is the first industrial reactor with continuous cofactor regeneration and the product L-tert-Leucine. So it's so effective, then we can recycle the coenzyme more than 100,000 times. And in the lab, a PhD student said, Professor Wandrey, if we reach 100,000, would you sponsor a bottle of sparkling wine? I said, yes. Oh, and if we reach 200,000, a bottle of champagne? I said, yes. And in the end, it cost me 3 bottles of champagne because 600,000 will reach, but it doesn't make sense. So 100,000 is enough, even 20,000 is enough. So the invention was very much water-soluble polymers used for cofactor regeneration, and then innovation was cofactors doesn't become cost limiting after I had paid 3 bottles of champagne. So a lot of patents were filed, and the man who actually had the idea for the synthesis was Mr. Bückmann from an institute in Germany. And of course, a lot of you see many different countries. And this is a paper which was cited 266 times and more. So the last example is from Gray Biotechnology. So that is anaerobic wastewater treatment. That happens in every pond. So here you don't need oxygen transfer. And that while in a normal municipal wastewater plant you have cold oxidation by means of a lot of oxygen, in such a pond you have cold pyrolysis. What is pyrolysis? Pyrolysis is the disintegration of molecules in the absence of oxygen. And microorganisms can do so at ambient temperature. And here is glucose. Here's acetic acid, and then from acetic acid, and metanoxazina bakri, as methane already mentioned, makes out of this methane and carbon dioxide. This is well known because here you see Dalton is increasing mass transfer, and his assistant is collecting biogas. It's a natural process. How can we use this in wastewater treatment? The problem is you must immobilize the biomass. So problem is the biomass is growing slowly. In order to bring it into your mind, I always say you would also have problems to multiply rapidly in the absence of oxygen. The same problem have microorganisms. They grow slowly in the absence of oxygen, but the problem can be solved. The solution is you must immobilize these slowly growing microorganisms in carriers. And you see here such a glass carrier. And the glass carrier, you see a lot of biogases coming out of this glass carrier. Here you see a magnification this shape of glass carrier is called Raschig rings. These Raschig rings formerly were filled into distillation columns to improve mass transfer. And in the pores of this carrier, you see here the microorganism. What looks like cauliflower is a group of microorganisms. They have a tendency to immobilize with each other. So that's very good to bring them in these carriers. So this is the solution, but we have a problem. In such a column, more and more gas evolves. In the upper part of the column, you have a lot of gas hold up. And here you develop from acetic acid, methane and carbon dioxide. So here it's very acid, here is less acid, you have a pH gradient. And the solution is you have a fixed bed loop reactor. You have partially recycled the partially purified wastewater, and that was patented worldwide. And here is the result. So 300 cubic meter each, and here is volcanic stone. Volcanic stone is also very porous due to the making of lava. And you simply break it down and fill it in these 300 cubic meter reactors, and then you can do so. So, in summary, what was the invention? The invention was mostly optimization of selective stress. I have to comment for a moment. What does that mean? If you, as a professor, maximize the stress on your students, you will have washout. The students go to another university. If you don't apply some stress, the students will become foul and lazy, fat and lazy. So you must find something in between. So, and that is why you say, oh, last week you worked 45 hours, this week you have to work 46 hours. And you wait until there is washout. And of course, you select for the best. And that is what we do here. We say, oh, dear microorganisms, please eat more wastewater, even more. And so you can go ahead, but it's not maximization, it's optimization of selective stress. And what was the most important in innovation? We got a letter from the German authorities. This is a technology not used in Germany so far, and that is why it cannot be approved. It's not used so far, and that is why it cannot be approved. That's innovation, yeah? And so in the end, we got the approval, but it was a hard way so far. So I come to my conclusion. Technology transfer is also possible with large companies. Also is a little bit, you see also. Yeah? Small companies are more flexible, but have not enough money. They listen to you, but they don't have enough money. Technology transfer can decisively be enhanced by information exchange. So you must tell, I am the greatest. Or I have the problem for your solution, and you are only part of the problem. It needs time. So my personal experience out of 3 or more decades is typically it takes 7 to 10 years. It's ridiculous. You see such a brilliant idea, continuous cofactor regeneration. People don't believe you. Then you have to found your own company, and until the company is in business, it takes time. Your own ideas are the best to transfer. If you don't burn for your own ideas, you must not expect that others do it for you. Others will offer shelf warmers. So, Technology Transfer Center Jülich, in the background, this is the Technology Transfer Center Jülich, is a home of a number of startup companies. They are not all longer there, but here, this is the mother company of this company now in China. And it's really nice if you have some brilliant PhD students and you can convince them to make a startup company. Typically, you have some very brilliant people, you have to approach them 1 year before PhD, otherwise they will be spoiled by too high wages of industry. Yeah, yes, I said here, come from a wind, you know the famous song, A Wind of Change. So my message is come from a wind of change to a storm of change. Why? In a global competition, success depends more and more on the question who is first to market. In the beginning, the quickest and not the most efficient wins. In other words, if I have consumed the glucose in a petri dish very quickly, you can come afterwards and try to eat this glucose very efficiently. So, I thank you for your kind listening. I apologize for giving you too much, but you did record it, so if you are still interested, there's a chance to look at it again. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Wandrey. Very motivating. I think about the last thing and also how to treat my students to motivate more. And it was a very motivating lecture, and I'm very happy you are here. We have some questions from the audience, and later I also want to invite my students or whoever wants to take a picture with you, so I know who was here. And I convinced Professor Wandrey to give me his PDF of the lecture, and I put it on a canvas, so my students can download it. And if you also, if you are not my students, you better buy a coffee for my students, and they give it to you. So it's a closed loop reactor now. So questions from the audience.
Okay, to scale down is very fantastic for the modern biotechnology. Because the efficiency for the growth rate is much higher compared with the large scale. But the question is how to separate. Small scale, right? Then compared with the yield or the production. So there's some constraint. So how do you solve this problem?
Yeah, that's a general question for the problems in scale up and scale down. So the typical, who are not so familiar with this, if you have a sugar cube and you have sugar powder, of course the sugar powder would dissolve in your coffee much quicker than a sugar cube because the surface of the sugar powder is much higher than of the sugar cube. So, of course, if you scale down more and more, you have no problems of mass transfer and heat transfer. And so that is why you can find out the maximum possible. Similarly, you can really do initial rate kinetics. I said our cells see more or less 99.99% substrate and more or less negligible product concentration. So we find the maximum of Mmax. We find the maximum of mass transfer and heat transfer. And now it is your task in scale up to approach this after you found the maximum. And for instance, this fixed bed loop reactor is an answer. So you reduce the pH gradient, which is in a big reactor, and you reduce the gas hold-up. So after you found the maximum parameters, it's the task of the engineers to talk to the microbiologists in the microfield, how can we approve the maximum possible? That's typical for this field.
Okay, next question.
Hello, Professor. I am a chemical engineering final year student, and I got a job offer last month from a biotech company, which is working on biopharmaceuticals. And the task the boss assigned me, the first is to analyze a pile of mass spectrum, and the second to scale up a fermenter, and the third is to study some electroporation stuff. And Professor, I would like to ask, what advice would you give us as we students and future employees to practice innovation in our industries?
So in soccer, I would say this was a suggestion to make a direct goal. Why?
Yes.
My wife and I, we have 3 children and 1 daughter. And my son-in-law, 10 days ago, he's a pharmacist and a medical doctor. 10 days ago, he got a job offer to become head of a unit, 500 people, to do pharmaceutical bioengineering. And I think it's a tremendous field for innovation. Why? In the past, the people who were developing drugs were so proud. They had a new thing, a very top seller, yes, like the statins or so. And they were so proud, they would, in each ridiculous reactor available, just to make it more quickly, just to enter the market and to save the maximum remaining patent time. So, and the stupidness of these people is your chance. Nowadays, so don't blame others to be so stupid, it's your chance. Why? If you say, oh, I have a blockbuster, nobody else can catch my market, I have a bad process, don't care. No, now you come and do a better production process. You go to these microscales where you can have hundreds and thousands of parameter screening, and you can come up quicker than the people in their fermenters. So they must do so-called consistency runs. Otherwise, they don't get the approval of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. But if you can do thousands of runs in your tiny reactor, you can find out what are the limiting factors. And now you can reduce time to market, and then you are the king.
Okay, maybe you exchange also address so you can tell him later about your success. It would be nice if we have a break later. More questions? Here.
Okay, I'm your student.
Yeah, I know.
Professor, today you gave a lot of successful example for the technology transfer. But do you have any example to share that is not so successful?
Oh,
Even
yes.
though they have the invention, but not good innovation.
Lots. You see, there is a saying, what is invention and innovation? That is 90% transparency and 10% ingenuity. So 90% is failed. So, example, you want to ask me for an example. So, for years, I tried to convince my PhD students to do racemic separation by enzymes. Not in this way, but if you want to separate D and L lactate, you know there is an L-lactate dehydrogenase and a D-lactate dehydrogenase, and it depends on cofactors. So if you put the L-lactate dehydrogenase on a carrier with a specific weight lower than 1, then the carrier with the L-lactate dehydrogenase would swim up in a column. And if you do the D-lactate dehydrogenase on a glass carrier, it will swim down. Then you say, oh, I have a tremendous process for countercurrent extraction of racemates. It never functioned. And I tried for years to convince my people. It doesn't function. You know why? The enzymes are brilliant to take up the lactate and D-lactate, but it doesn't go off. The affinity is too good. So it's all very diluted.
How to put the cells in the chips? How to put the cells into the chips?
In the reactor?
Yes. In the mini reactor, how to convince the cells to go in?
Oh, high with a laser pincette. What's a pincette?
Laser pin. Stefan, do you know? My German colleague. Optical trap. Optical trap.
There is an optical technique.
Like a pipe.
You have a cell in solution, and you have an inharmonic field of the laser. And the cell goes into the highest intensity of the laser, and then you can move the laser generator to the pot where you would like to have it.
Wow.
That's called optische Pinzette. Wer kann Pinzette übersetzen?
Jan? We have many Germans here, but nobody can translate.
You know, an instrument, you can draw out one hair from your eyebrow.
Oh, your wife. Pick up. Pinset. Pinset.
You know what I mean? So, and that is an optical instrument.
Yeah. My wife has one. Show me. You pick up now a cell of Professor Wandrey.
You can.
Oh yeah, don't do it.
And there is an optical analog where you have an inhomogeneous laser field, and you can make the cell go into the center of highest laser activity, and then you move mechanically. Thank you.
Okay.
I must confess, I can describe it, but I don't understand it.
Maybe at the end I just tell you just a story. Professor Wandrey is the reason why I'm here. Can I tell the story?
Yeah.
In 1993, I believe, I was applying to be a professor in Aachen University in Germany. I was still in Germany, of course, and after unification. And I went for a rehearsal, or they wanted to interview me. I gave a lecture, and I was another candidate was coming after me, and normally you are not allowed to see the next candidate. I was waiting there around the corner, and I said, "Oh my God, one of Wandrey's students is coming," and one of your best students, now professor, and so he had a very famous teacher, and he came from industry, of course, and I was from academic. And so I had an honorable second place, and he was a winner. And so this is why, and I'm not in Aachen now, but here. And this is why you are all here in this lecture theater, and thanks a lot, Christian, for help.
Yeah.
Because of you. You know, sometimes to be a loser is not so bad. Second place is also
me a
okay.
letter. He is fed up of losing more competitions with my former PhD students to become a professor.
I was very angry.
But I tell you the second part of this story. The same professor which was elected is now the supervisor of the PhD thesis of my youngest son.
Also biotech.
So, and so he mentioned 14 professors. So, and my son, who was brave enough to actually have the same field as I, biochemical engineering, he wanted to do a PhD thesis after studying. So, and he traveled a lot around Germany, and then had an interview with PhD thesis there and there, and then he came back and said, "It's terrible. Where I go, there is a former PhD student of you."
You want to find a place without his daddies.
But in the end, he ended up as one of my former PhDs. But that's not the entire story. So when he applied for the job in Aachen, then he more or less had decided to leave from his present place. That was another town in Germany, Münster. And there was an institute for chemo and biosensoric.
Yes.
And in his book, Bioanalytics for Beginners, he says, yes, I was in this institute, but this institute then went bankrupt. So not
after I left.
After he left. But after he left, I became the chairman of the scientific advisory board of this institute. And 8 months after I was appointed the chairman, the institute went bankrupt.
Wow.
So the only apologize I had, I say, even with a high efficiency, I couldn't achieve this in 8 months.
It means if I would still be around, you would fire me. Really? Oh, yeah. So very lucky. You see, life is wonderful. And if there's no more questions, I think we have. You can approach Professor Wandrey outside. And my students, I would like to ask Also, Stefan, please join for a picture. And of course, if you would have separate pictures, you do it, but please not one by one because it takes too long time. So we make a group picture now. And I promise I put these slides on the web. And I also make a small, you know my style. If you see a smiley at the slide, this is a very interesting slide for the final examination. Okay? This is a trick. Okay, thanks for coming again. Bye.